Hello, ladies and gentlemen. Robert Swartwood here. Tonight, I am joined by a narrator who has narrated over 500 audiobooks and appeared in over 50 films and television series, including The Sopranos and Boardwalk Empire. His 2013 recording of Jess Walter's Beautiful Ruins was named Audible's Audiobook of the Year and earned him the Audie Award for Best Solo Narration. The New York Times has called him a master in his field, at the forefront of a new kind of celebrity. And the Oprah Daily said that as a narrator, he is in a class by himself. That's right. It's your favorite narrator of mine, Edoardo Ballerini. Eduardo, how's it going?
Hey, thanks. Thank you for that very generous introduction. Sometimes I get embarrassed by these things, but I appreciate it.
Oh, no. Well, you're humble about it, so that's
Right.
good. But no,
But
thanks
we
for,
were before we. Sorry to interrupt you, but
yeah.
we were talking a little bit before we jumped on here, and that idea of like the sort of the humble kind of the humility of it, about how the narrator is kind of like hidden behind the scenes a little bit, and so sometimes there's this awkwardness of when the narrator's getting attention. It feels like, well, wait a minute, is this supposed to be happening? Right? Aren't we supposed to be behind the words, behind the author? So,
Well, I've seen you where I follow you on Instagram, and you do these events with the authors where you
I
are
do, yeah.
essentially interviewing those authors. But I don't
Right.
know typically, and this is for what I do here, I usually just have author friends on and we chat about recent books and projects and
Yeah.
whatever else. And the other day, I had been thinking like, it'd be really good to chat with some of these narrators, narrators
Yeah.
who have done some of my own past books and some other narrators that I'm fans of, because I feel like it's, especially now, I mean, narration has become so huge. Like, I mean, back in the day, I mean, I've always been a fan of audiobooks, but it used to be you had to go to the library, you'd get like the pack of the
Right.
CDs, like it was like eight,
Right.
10 discs, and then
Right.
you'd listen to it in the car because you didn't really have like
Sure.
a disc man with
Right.
you, where now everybody can just download it to their phone, to their
Yeah.
tablet, and it's just,
Sure.
it's become so huge. So we're going to talk about all of that. To start, though, obviously, we want to get back in some of your backstory. And every time I have on well, in the past, a big name author and obviously a big name narrator, they often have a Wikipedia page. And in your case, you have an IDP or an IMDb page, which
Yeah.
honestly, your trivia section is a little lacking, I have to say.
Oh
You need to,
no.
or you have
There
to
I
like
think there's a Wikipedia entry on me as well.
Oh
My
no, there
my
is Wikipedia,
Yeah,
and we're
yeah,
gonna get to
yeah.
that. But yeah, so
Uh-oh. Uh-oh.
I was hoping to find a little bit more trivia, some more like fast facts in there. So I
Right.
always like to do kind of like a Rich Eisen celebrity true or
Okay.
false when we
All
do
right.
these.
All right. Okay. Let's do it.
So at the age of 10,
Yeah.
Eduardo made his first professional appearance on stage at the Theater for the New York City, New York, and Mario Prosperi's Uncle Mario.
That is correct. Yeah, I was a child actor. And quick little story about that. So Mario Prosperi was a friend of my father's. He wrote a two-character piece. Theater for the New City was this avant-garde theater in the East Village. I somehow got cast in this role. I was about 10 years old. We did a run. And from there, some I don't know, talent scout or network scout or whatever, saw me and wanted me to come up to, I think it was NBC at the time, to, I guess, test for a TV show. And so my mother and I went up Midtown to this office, and we were sitting there in this sort of waiting room, waiting to go in and like meet the executives and test for a show. And while we were there, my mother was like, this isn't happening. And she took me out of the room, and that was the end of my child acting career. But I could have like ended up on a TV series or something. And then I didn't come back to acting until after I graduated college. So it took a while to come all the way around. So the long-winded answer to your question is yes, that's true.
I, I mean, I've heard that with child actors. I mean, it is, it's a dedication for the parents to have to,
Oh,
because it's
sure.
not, I
Yeah.
mean, it's like they oftentimes, I think it was Neil Patrick Harris basically said, his family had to completely uproot because
Oh,
he got
sure.
the Doogie Howser MD, and
Sure.
initially he
Yeah.
had just been doing some TV movies here and there, and then it was all of a sudden. And so,
Right.
I mean, was that kind of the reason where she was like, no, or
Look, I absolutely applaud her decision, first of all. I
yeah,
think it was the right thing because, children in film and television, it can get very dicey very quickly. I think she just saw that it would be a very abnormal life and it would take me away from regular schooling and regular childhood. And probably that was the right thing to do.
yeah. Yeah, no, I mean, you never, sometimes I mean, some child actors really turn out great, other ones not
Sure.
so
Right.
much. But
Not so
so
much.
then it
Yeah.
said your professional role on screen was as an autistic teenager in Law and Order.
That was my first professional acting job. Yeah. I
So,
played an autistic teenager in a single episode of Law and Order. And I had no lines, but I was very much in these scenes. And I have to say, it was kind of like a weird debut, just to go into something that was quite challenging. And for those of you who understand how episodic television works, it works very quickly. So by that I mean that like I was cast on a Friday and shooting started on a Monday or a Tuesday. And so basically I had the weekend to sort of prepare to be an autistic child. And so I spent the weekend at a clinic actually in New York City, observing some kids and sort of talking to their therapists and I tried to absorb as much as I could. But that's how my acting career got started. Yeah.
so how old were you when you were on Law and Order?
I was 25. I started a
Okay,
little late acting. As I say, I didn't start until after college.
right.
And I may actually, maybe I was 24, but somewhere in there. But no, I was never. So I graduated college and then I spent a couple of years bumbling around before I really did anything.
So in college, were you acting too?
No, I was an English major, and I had every
I was an
intention
English
of,
major too.
hey, I had every intention of becoming a writer and an academic and following in my parents' footsteps. Both my parents are academics and writers. And then one summer, right after college, I said, no, I'm going to be an actor. And it just kind of happened.
Okay, so I just want to go back. So when you were in 10, though, you were on stage, the theater for
Hmm.
New York City.
Yep.
Um, remind me again, like, so like what happened? And like, so like when did you then stop,
So yeah, so
acting at
the
that
theater,
point into college?
right, the theater for the New City thing was basically because the playwright was a friend of my father's, and they
Hmm,
needed a child actor.
I see.
And I had done nothing but elementary school productions,
Right.
but they kind of were like, oh, maybe Eduardo can do it, and I sort of did it. And I had a great time with it. But then it wasn't something I was necessarily going to like, really pursue. And as I said, there was that network meeting, which got thwarted very quickly. And so that was kind of the end of it. And then I never did any acting in high school or college. I was never in the school plays or any of that stuff. And then it was after graduating from college that I went into acting. And then many, many years later, the narration thing kind of came along kind of by accident, to be honest. It was like one day somebody said, would you be interested in recording a book? And I was like, sure, why not? Let's give this a shot. And then it was right at that time when Audible had just founded and the industry was kind of taking off and there was this kind of need for actors. And so it was like the right timing and I was the right person in the right place at the right time. And then it just all started rolling very quickly. And then audiobooks and narration became a huge part of my life, obviously.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, we definitely are going to get into the narration because it says here 2007, basically as a favor, you recorded for a
Yeah,
friend, The Prince. I guess they were
that's right.
starting a new studio, and so that
Yeah,
was how that was your very, very first
yeah,
audiobook.
yeah.
Before that, though, I have to ask because I know, how can I not talk to you and get into it? But I mean, come on, you were on The Sopranos.
I
So how
was.
did that
Yeah.
come about?
So The Sopranos, I'd been acting, obviously. I'd done a number of TV shows and films, and the one of the casting agents for the show was actually somebody I went to college with, and we were friendly, and she knew of me and my work, and this character came along for those who haven't seen it. I play a heroin addict in the show, and for some reason she was like, I know who can play a heroin addict. It's like, okay. Um, and I remember I got the script and I taped an audition. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. I taped an audition, and this was back when, speaking of technology changing, so I filmed my audition on like a camcorder, and then I burned it onto a DVD, and then I went to the post office and mailed the DVD to New York, overnighted it or something. And they saw it, and then like lo and behold, they're like, "Oh, you've got the part." And again, it happened very quickly. I was suddenly like on a plane back to New York, and there I was on set, and there was Michael Imperioli, and there's Jim Gandolfini, and all these people, and I was like, oh my god, yeah, I'm on The Sopranos. Like it just sort of the show was already a huge success.
Yeah,
My
what
character
season
showed
was
up
it
in
in? It's been a
I
while
no, I
since I
was
saw the show.
I showed up in season 6.
Oh
So the
wow.
show, yeah,
Yeah.
the show was already a juggernaut. It was already this international phenomenon. And getting to that set was extraordinary. I mean, there was security everywhere. There were fans lined up in the street. It was quite something. It was sort of like being backstage at a Rolling Stones concert or something. You just felt this energy around this production, which I had never ever seen on any other set, and I've never seen on any set since, to be honest.
Yeah.
But it was great, and it worked out very well. And so I was originally just going to be in one episode, and then it became two, then it became three, and I think ultimately it was 4 episodes. Um, and I put it this way with that character: it's like a small but memorable part in the whole series. It's clearly not one of the major roles of the show, but everybody seems to remember this character, which is extraordinary to me. They all remember these scenes. It somehow it stood out somehow. So I'm very proud of it.
Yeah, yeah, and then of course you were in Boardwalk Empire. You did other
Right.
stuff on
Yeah.
24
Yeah.
on Elementary.
Yeah.
You had a series regular role though on the show Quarry.
Hmm.
That was something. I mean, it was on Cinemax, and I felt like that was before like streaming really became a thing. I mean, how long ago was that? Because
So the Quarry actually is a very interesting kind of moment. What happened with Quarry? So Quarry, this was 10 years ago now. Quarry, so Cinemax, you may not know this, but Cinemax is owned by HBO. And so what HBO was trying to do about 10 years ago with Cinemax was actually make it kind of a better channel, a little more highbrow, because those of us who remember the original Skinemax and all the kind of those kind of movies. And so they did a show with Clive Owen called The Nick. They did a
yeah,
show called Banshee, and then they did Quarry. And Quarry was meant to once again sort of up the ante and take it to a new level. And the show, I have to say, was fantastic. I mean, it's a really wonderful series. Unfortunately, despite it being slated for 5 years, we only got through season 1. Part of that, I don't want to bore you with the politics, but there was a changing of the guard at HBO. There was all kinds of like behind the scenes machinations. And so we stopped after season 1. Now, what was interesting for me personally about that, despite the professional disappointment of not doing seasons 2, 3, 4, and 5, which would have been great, um, at that time, I was recording a series of books called My Struggle by Karlova Knausgaard, this big Norwegian writer. And the books are altogether are like 3,600 pages. And it's first person and it's very heavy, deep, intimate kind of stuff. And so while Quarry was getting canceled, I was recording My Struggle and really, really enjoying it. I was having a great time with these books. And so I had this kind of fork in the road moment. I was like, you know what? The TV show didn't work out, but this narration stuff is fascinating to me. And I'm going to kind of go down this road for a while. And at the same time, I also had young children. They were small. My kids were like 3 and a newborn at the time. And I was like, this also gives me a chance to have normal human working hours. I get to work from basically 9 to 5, like a normal person, as opposed to flying to some location and being on set till 4 in the morning and all that kind of stuff. And so it was one of those sort of moments in my life where the pieces all just kind of came together the right way. So despite the disappointment about the show, it actually turned out to be a great thing. So
yeah.
that's why Quarry will always have a special place in my life.
And so on the Wikipedia thing, it also mentioned that you essentially took a step back from acting because obviously narration became your full-time gig. However, last year you were in,
Yeah,
of course, A Murder at the End of the
in the world. Yeah,
World, at the
yeah.
end of the world. That was one where they just reached out to you and said, "Hey, we have this in mind for you," right? Like you didn't have to audition or anything.
So what happened there is interesting. So my character of Ray is, without giving anything away, is an AI bot. Uh, think of like for those who know 2001, the film Hal the computer, right? It's kind of like that kind of role in the show. And so part of the role is on screen, and part of the role is just a voice. And the directors, Britt Marling and Zalbat Manglish, were fans of my narration. And so they were like, oh, whose voice would be great to be the voice sort of in the walls is Edoardo. And then there was also an on-screen component. So I had not been in front of the camera in many, many years. And it was kind of a great return to it because my character was all shot against a green screen, and then it was all pasted into the scenes later. So I didn't have to deal with like props and hitting my marks and all that kind of stuff. It was very much just stationary in front of a green screen filming. So it's kind of like the perfect re-entry into filming. It was a little gentle that way, and I had a great time, and I would love to do more. And so we'll see what comes in the future.
Yeah.
But it was nice to get back on a soundstage.
Yeah, that was what I was going to ask because, and yeah, we don't want to give anything away for people who haven't seen the show yet, but it
Mm.
did not seem like you were really ever on set. Like you were completely doing it like remote
Right.
somewhere and they just
Floating
kind of put
head.
you in.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. I was actually on set. I was right next door to the other sets.
Oh, okay.
Uh, it was all in the same soundstage, so I got a chance to interact with the cast and everybody. And but it was very much like I was off to the side because, as you say, I was not in the scenes directly. One thing I did do though was for some of the longer scenes where you hear Ray but don't see him, is I actually went to set and read in my lines off camera, which is not something that an actor has to do. They can cut that in later. But I thought it would be better for the other actors if it was actually me reading in the lines and playing the scene with them.
Yeah.
So I was there. I was sort of reading things in that way.
Yeah. And then also it says that you wrote, direct, and starred in a short film called Goodnight Valentino. When did that happen?
Mhm. So that would have been 2003. It was a short film about silent film icon Rudolph Valentino. And I took it to the Sundance Film Festival. And then it played at the Museum of Modern Art in New York. And it's a sweet little film. I had a moment in my life where I was like, well, maybe I want to, write and direct, as every actor kind of probably at some point was like, oh, I should write and direct something. And so I wrote and directed this short. I was also in it. Um, and I realized very quickly that that's a lot of work to write, direct, act, produce, like all of it. Like it's big. I didn't quite understand how much was involved, even for a 15-minute short. Um, and so I was like, you know what? I don't think I'm gonna be a writer director necessarily. I did write a feature about Valentino that I shopped around. It didn't get made, obviously. And then I've written some other stuff with people. But that short was fun to make, and it was great to go to the Sundance Film Festival, which I'm sure people know is like quite the spot for a film festival and independent films.
Is that available anywhere for anybody who wants to see it?
I think if you just Google Goodnight Valentino, there's a couple of spots where you can see it. I think you can even watch the whole feature on IMDb.
Oh, wow.
It may actually be up there.
Okay, very cool. Yeah, everyone needs
Yeah.
to go check that out. So during that time though, I mean, obviously writing and directing and starring and
Yeah.
everything else, obviously, yes, that just sounds like a lot of work. I mean, it sounds exhausting even on my end, just sitting here. Um, but I mean, have you still been, because you mentioned before about being an English major because you were thinking about writing. I mean, have
Yeah.
you throughout the years, have you like been writing anything? I mean, and well, and I
Yeah.
mean, we can talk about the just, I mean, you also collaborated
Hmm.
on a little novella with, of course, best-selling author Jess Walter,
Hmm.
called "The Angel of Rome." How'd that come about?
So yeah, so to answer the first part of your question, do I write things? Yes, I do. I have written some screenplays. I have written some short stories. I have written some longer pieces. Uh, I have not. It's funny. I'll be very candid with you. Like I write them, and then I kind of put them away, and I don't. And then I come back to them, and I think, you know what? I'm kind of done with this. I don't necessarily want it to be out there in the world. Now, the Jess Walter thing was different. So Jess approached me. He had learned. through an article in the New York Times that I had spent a summer in Rome studying Latin. This is true, and that's when I became an actor. Actually, I quit my class and I was like, I'm going to become an actor. And he thought this is a story that needs to be written. And so we talked about it for a while, and we kind of hashed out an outline for a highly fictionalized version of what happened to me. So if you read or listen to The Angel of Rome, that central character of Jack Rigel is based on me, but it's not exactly me. And so it was a fantastic process. Jess came to New York. He actually lives out in Spokane. And for a week, we kind of, he would write, I would read, we would talk, we would kind of workshop it together. And it was a fascinating process. And then it was originally an Audible original. So it got released there. And then it became part of Jess's story collection called The Angel of Rome. Jess is a masterful writer. I felt like I had, I was like sort of sitting at the feet of the master, like watching him kind of work and create, and to be a part of that process with him was absolutely extraordinary. And I think it's a very funny piece, and I think it's also a very moving piece, which is really what we were after.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah,
so yeah,
it's
so
really
it was
nice for anybody who can listen to it. I mean, it's like it's like a
it's
little over
yeah,
2 hours.
it's a 2 hour.
Um,
It's like watching a movie, you know.
yeah, and
And
it does have it definitely has a very like there's a lot of humorous parts to
mhm,
it
yeah,
because Jack keeps kind of getting into this. Well, again, you can go listen
yeah,
to it,
yeah,
but the way it wraps up, it's
yeah.
really nice. Yeah,
Yeah, it's poignant at the end,
yeah.
and we wanted to find that feeling of where a story, which, as you say, is sort of very funny throughout, can also have a deeper meaning to it.
Yeah. So then, yeah, so that's actually the name, or that's the title of Jess's short story collection.
Correct.
Um, I feel like I have some of Jess's books around here. I don't think I have a short story collection. Like, are you listed in there as a co-author
Yeah,
on that story?
yeah, yeah,
Okay,
yeah,
good, good.
yeah.
Um, all right. So, and then let's see here. Let's get past some of this other stuff here. Oh, it says that so you have do you have a studio in your like a lot of these narrators, it seems like now they have they have their own studios in the
Mhm.
home. So they
Yeah,
essentially are working, I mean, they don't have to like go to a publisher. A lot of publishers will have their own sound
yeah,
studios with the engineers and the producers and everything else. But a lot of them will just do it in home. So like
yeah,
at what point in your narration career did you decide I don't want to keep going to, to all these studios. I'm just
yeah.
gonna like kind
Well,
of like make my own.
right. I'll tell you, the pandemic hastened that process for a lot of people.
Mm.
So when I started, I was living in New York City, and as you can imagine, a New York City apartment doesn't have a ton of room for a sound booth. So I was going to publishers. Then I moved outside the city. I'm currently just north of the city, in a house, and there was a little space in the basement, which had been a wine cellar, and I converted it to a studio. But even after I did that, I was still going into the city a lot. So I would take the train into the city and work in the studios in the city. There was also another studio out here in Westchester. I'd go there. So I had my own booth, but I wasn't actually using it that much. And then, as you can imagine, the pandemic hit and everything changed. And suddenly we were all working at home, and actors were scrambling to figure out how to convert closets into studios, and people were saying, how do I do this? And I was getting all kinds of calls from people saying, I need to set up this a booth, like how do I do this? um, and then what happened coming out of it is that once this was kind of established that narrators had their own home studios, it just kind of continued. And so it's very rare now that I'll actually go into a publisher. There's no reason. So even if it's a project that involves a director, and we can talk about that, some projects have a director, some don't. Um, the director is just in my headphones on a Zoom call like this, you know, and so I'll record at home and they'll be listening, and so we're not in the same room. But the internet is basically one big mic cable, so it's like it's all connected anyway. And so that's what happened, and now everybody just has their home studio. And so I can't remember the last time I went to a publisher, to be honest.
So, all right, let's jump back. So you narrate the prince. That's your very first narration.
Yeah.
Is that still available, like online?
I
Is
think
that
it
on Audible?
is. Yeah.
Okay.
So we're talking about Machiavelli's The Prince. Yeah, I believe it is. It was done, I think, pre-Audible, to be honest.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure where it ended up, but it's probably out there somewhere.
And so from there, and again, I think back in the green room, we were discussing a little bit about this, but personally, I've always been a fan of audiobooks. But back then, I mean, in especially in high school, college, I mean, if you wanted to listen to an audiobook, if it wasn't a
Yeah.
cassette tape, it was a CD. And essentially it was like this big book of like 8 to 10. I mean, how many, it
Yeah.
was like an hour per disc.
That sounds
Would you
about right.
say?
Yeah. So like a
So like
ten
depending
hour
on,
book's like 10 discs. Yeah.
yeah, so
Yeah.
so essentially you were listening to the CD. At the very end it would say, insert disc 3, and then you would have to go
Yeah.
to book, and then it would just, but then of course Audible and like now Apple
Sure.
Books, and I mean everybody has it, everything's digital. It just goes
Sure.
straight through. You don't have to like break up different sections.
Right.
Um but at the time, I don't know, like I feel like audiobooks are just much more commonplace nowadays. If there's a novel or whatever, nonfiction, it's going to have an audiobook. That wasn't
Yeah.
always the case though. There were a lot of books that were getting published that were not having audiobooks because of the cost. I mean, I don't want to, I guess, pull back the curtain too much, but for narrators, and guys, correct me if I'm wrong, but
Mm.
narrators 9 times out of 10, there's no like profit sharing. You guys are not getting royalties. It's essentially like work for hire. You get like a flat
Mhm.
fee
Yeah.
to narrate this book, and
Mhm.
then that's it. And then,
That's
maybe
correct.
the audiobook is successful and, whatever
Mhm.
else, maybe not, but, you get your fee and everything else.
Right.
So like, I mean, yeah, like how did that come about when you started doing some of these? Because I remember, I think you said that you did one of Joseph Finder's first novel, the Moscow Club. I mean,
Hmm.
like at what point did you get on the radar of these publishers? Because even
So,
back then, I feel
yeah.
like narrators. It's not like it 20 years ago, 30 years ago. It's not like it is now, where there are some like household name narrator
Yeah.
names, and there's like
Yeah.
so many different narrators out there looking for work.
The industry, you're absolutely right, has exploded, and there was a time when not every title had an audio version. That's absolutely correct. Now, the audio sales of a book can be, even up to 25% of a title's sales. So if you think about that, that's something that, publishers can't leave that kind of money on the table. They can't just say, like, you know what, we're going to just leave 20 to 25% of our potential audience out. And uh, so now everything pretty much has an audio component. Production, I believe, has gotten less expensive, in part because there's a bigger pool of narrators. As we said, a lot of them have their home studios, so you don't have to pay for booths and engineers and all this kind of stuff. So it's become much quicker to do it that way. The second part of your question, so yeah, for me, it happened very quickly. So I went from not really knowing what an audiobook was to being in demand within like a couple of years. And it really happened because of Beautiful Ruins, which is Jess Walter's big hit book. So Beautiful Ruins came along. Jess was not a big author at the time. He had not been a best-selling author yet. And I had done maybe 10 books or something, which that may sound like a lot, but it's really not. Uh, so I was basically brand new to audiobooks. And somebody at Harper Audio was a fan of a film of mine called Dinner Rush, where I played a chef. So Jess's book takes place in Italy and it takes place in Hollywood. And so she was like, "Oh, Italy, Hollywood. I know who would be good for this book." And so she called me and I recorded it and it became a huge hit. I'm just going to put it that way. It outsold the print, the audio version. And it was kind of, this is 2012. And that was unprecedented, unheard of, that an audiobook would outsell the print, not only outsell the print, but outsell the print of a best-selling book. And so people were like, whoa, what happened here? And the industry kind of took notice, not only of me, but of the fact that there was a lot of money to be made in audiobooks. And I feel like it was kind of a turning point moment. And so I started getting a lot of offers after that. And then, as I say, things rolled along. And then a few years after that, a couple of articles were written about me in places, and then there was a big profile in the New York Times, which was written about me, and so suddenly it became like a much bigger thing, and it ushered in this kind of era of, as you say, like the quote unquote the celebrity narrator, right? It's like the person who's become known for narrating audiobooks, which didn't really exist before. Who the hell knew like who these people were? Uh, and so it all kind of rolled along very quickly. And I have to say, it has been, look, there have been ups and downs, of course, but it has been a fairly smooth ride for me personally in this side of the industry. If I compare it to, like, film and television, where it's like been sort of ups and downs, starts and stops, like, oh, this is good, this is not, like the audio world for me has just been this one smooth ride kind of upward the whole time, which I've been very grateful for. And we'll see where it goes. I mean, the industry continues to evolve, it continues to change. So we'll see what's next. But I didn't
Yeah.
really have to wait very long before people took notice.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think it's hyperbole to say that you're a rock star in the narration field. I mean,
Right.
one of my I write under a pen name, Avery Bishop. One of my Avery Bishop novels was narrated by
Yeah.
Brittany Presley, and when that
Oh,
book
sure.
came out, one of the very first reviews on Audible was somebody saying, "I didn't know anything about the author of the book, but I'm a huge Brittany
Yeah.
Presley fan, and then I
Yeah.
downloaded it. And fortunately, they really liked the book, but it's like,
Yeah.
there are people out there who will download." The books just for the narrator. They're just
That
because
has
they see, oh,
become
Eduardo has this, he's narrating this book. It
right.
looks interesting. I'm gonna download it.
That has become more and more common, where people will go for the voice as much as they'll go for the author.
Yeah. And I mean, as a fan of
And
audiobooks, I
that
mean, there are
is a pretty
definitely,
recent
go-to
phenomenon.
narrators there. I just know that they're going to be solid. There are other ones
Hmm.
where it's like, okay, I want to listen to, the
Hmm.
sample first. Because I feel like, I don't know if you would agree with this, but I feel like a narrator such as yourself can take an okay book and make it good, can make a good book and make it great, can make a great book and make it stellar. But a subpar narrator can take a good book and,
Yeah.
really kind of
Yeah.
make it, because it's just, I don't know, there's just something about it. Because, I mean, you're not just reading. I feel like sometimes people think like, oh, a narrator is just reading the book. And for me,
Right.
I always feel like, yeah, but you're also like performing it in a way. I mean,
Right.
it's not just reading like word, word, word. It's like you're really getting into the emotions, you're really getting into the characters, into the pacing and everything
Mhm.
else.
It's a fine line, though, because yes, you're performing the book, but I feel very strongly that the narrator shouldn't get in front of the book or ahead of the book. And by that, I mean that the performance shouldn't overshadow and overwhelm the writing.
Mhm.
This is still very much a job where you're in service to the writing. And that is different from film, television, or theater, let's say, where the writing is actually in service to the actor, right? The lines in a screenplay are written so that an actor can then take them and do something even greater and even bigger and more memorable with them, right? You want that face that delivers that line, and that's what it's about. And in fact, the screenwriter kind of disappears, right? And the actor is the star. I think we can all pretty much agree on that. That in Hollywood, it's an actor system, um, whereas in publishing, it's a writer system. And so the actor in this case has to become secondary to the writer. And so I feel very strongly that if you get to a point as a narrator where the performance is overwhelming the writing, then something's off. And so
Yeah.
what you want is that fine line where the performance is serving the writing. And that's
Yeah.
the sweet spot.
Yeah, because I think that usually, I mean, writing, at least good writing, there's a rhythm to it.
Sure.
It's not. I mean, I'm sure you've probably narrated books where the writing could be choppy and and could be a little awkward at time. And so, and again,
Yeah.
I think it's just that synergy of when you have a really good book and a really good narrator, it just makes magic
Right.
happen, I guess.
It's casting. It's really no different than film or stage in that you want the right actor for the right role, right? So you want the right narrator for the right author. And when that happens, you get something good. Now you can have a poor pairing, right? You can cast the wrong actor in a role, and then you see the movie and you're like, somebody else could have done this role better. And the same thing happens in narration. where you could be listening to a book and you're like, a different narrator probably would have handled this material better. So that's just kind of the nature of it.
Yeah. Yes, some authors I feel like when they're writing, they usually like picture the characters. I'm like, oh, who would be cast as
Right.
actors?
Sure.
Oftentimes I find myself being like, when this is turned into an audiobook, who would be a good narrator for this? Who's going to be,
Right. Right.
whose voice is really going to bring this alive?
Right.
Um, but no, I mean, it makes complete sense. So for you, okay, so you get into this. Okay, well, first of all, so Beautiful Ruins, you said takes place in Italy. On your
Hmm.
IMDb, one of the facts on there was that you were a dual citizen of U.S. and Italy.
Hmm.
True?
I am. Yeah. So my father is Italian, my mother's American, and I have been a dual citizen my whole life. And so, yes, I hold two passports. I speak two languages, and I feel very much a part of two cultures. So,
And with I don't think I've listened to I feel like I have the ebook of A Beautiful Ruins. I don't think I have the audiobook, but obviously the Angel of Rome, you speak some Italian in that. And I mean for me, I don't speak Italian, but it sounded like it was fluent. So I'm assuming you
yeah,
speak
I am.
fluent
Yeah, I am a fluent.
Italian. Do
I've
you
been.
speak any other languages?
I, I, I can sort of muddle my way through a conversation in French. I can understand a lot of Spanish, but that's about it.
So I guess my question is like when you so for some books that, say, oh, they're going to use actual like Russian or they're going to use
Right.
Spanish, when you encounter that type of stuff, and this goes into my next question in terms of just like the prep when you take on a project, what type
Hmm.
of prep do you do? Do you read the entire book first? Do you take like
Hmm.
notes throughout? Because I had heard, I think Jack Carr was talking about how Ray Porter just the first time he reads a book is when he's narrating it. And so
Okay.
Jack said he had to find out that like if a character's supposed to have an accent, he needs to note that
Right.
really early on because
You would want to
already
know,
like
right?
Ray's just going through and
Yeah, I think that's I don't know if that's true about Ray, but I think that's probably a dangerous approach because, yeah, you don't want to find out on page 200 that the guy is supposed to have a German accent. Although I will say that if the author took 200 pages to mention the German accent, something else is wrong. Uh, they might want to have mentioned that a little earlier too. No, I think more to the point is that you as the performer, as the actor, probably need to know, you know, if that character at the who shows up in chapter one is, they might show up at the end and reveal themselves to be the killer. Like you probably want to know that, right, as you're reading it, because you want to set something, you want to drop a little breadcrumb there in your performance about it. So what I do, just to explain very quickly, so I'll get a book, I'll read it quickly. I kind of skim through it very quickly, and I do that to get a sense of the author's voice, to get a sense of the characterization, to get a sense of the basic plot. But I don't want to know it to the point where I feel like I'm done with it. I want there to be something still captivating and enticing about it, so that when I go in to record it, I'm still sort of curious. Because I did have a thing early in my career where I kind of over prepped something, and I did have the feeling that by the time I got into the booth to record it, I was kind of done with it. You know, I was like, I've already read this book. And so I was like, this is not the right way to do it. So I want to know the book. I want to know the characters. I want to know the author's voice. I want to know what kind of, you know, sentences and paragraphs this person works with, what kind of feel they have. But I need to leave enough room for discovery at the same time. Another way to think of it might be like, so you rehearse a play, right? And so you're an actor and you're waiting in the wings. You need to be nervous, right? It's very healthy as an actor to be waiting in the wings and be a little nervous and scared about going out on that stage. If you're waiting in the wings and you're like, whatever, let's let's get this show over with, you're probably not going to have your best performance. And so I like to be and waiting in the wings, nervous. And so that's the way I approach it.
so when you were starting a project, how
Yeah.
like what is a typical day for you when you're recording? Like how many usable hour like how long are you in the
Yeah.
booth versus like how many usable hours come out of that?
That's a good question. So these days, and I say these days because it's changed a bit. Years ago, back when I was a younger man, I could sort of go for longer in the booth, but now I find that I can get about, I'd say about 5 hours of work uh, done, and I'm not recording continuously. Believe me, I'm taking breaks. I'm having a lunch or whatever. But about a 5 hour work day, maybe push it to six if I really need to hit a deadline. And in those, let's call it 5 hours, maybe 2.5 hours of audio will come out of it. And that's again with taking the breaks and all of that stuff. And so, yeah, on a good day, you're getting like 2 hours of a book done. So 2 to 3 hours. So if you have a 10-hour book, do the math, you're going to need 4 to 5 days to get that done. I find that if I go too long, first of all, my throat starts to hurt, my brain starts to hurt, my eyes start to hurt. I just get a little squirrely in there, and I realize it's time to stop. And so, as I say, when I first started out, I could kind of go for longer for whatever reason, but now I feel like to do my best work, that's about the right pace for me.
Do you do like vocal warm-ups before every session?
I don't have a specific set of vocal warm-ups. It's a good question. But what I do is before I hit the record button, is I read at least 2 or 3 pages just to get my voice going and to get back into the book and get back into I need to get back into the feel of it, get back into the characters, get back into the plot. Let's say it's something I worked on a Monday and I'm coming back on a Tuesday. I'm not going to just walk into the booth and hit record, go. And so I'll go into the booth and I'll read a few pages aloud, just to make sure my brain is back in it and I know where I am, and it warms me up that way.
Yeah. So how do you, for certain books that have like a lot of characters,
Yeah,
how do you keep track of, because I mean, you're a narrator who,
right.
oftentimes the different characters will have different voices or different inflections
Sure.
or whatever else. How do you try, I mean, do you like kind of keep notes so that like, okay,
Yeah,
on day five, when we meet a character that we haven't seen since chapter two, this is what
yeah,
they sound like.
yeah. I do keep some notes, I make those notes as I'm going along. What I kind of do in my head is I cast it. And so, and I'll just think, okay, this character is going to be, my friend so and so. And by that, I don't necessarily mean that I'm going to impersonate them, but I just need to have kind of a mental reference as to who this person is. Or this other character comes along and I'll think, oh, this character makes me think of Humphrey Bogart, whatever, just to have something in my head to refer to them. And so by doing that, I have something to hook back onto when I come back to them chapters later. Um, Sometimes, if I feel like it's particularly important when the character is first introduced, I'll make a little separate audio clip and keep that aside. And so I'll have a reference of the characterization that I chose. So I'll put that in a little file, and I'll say, this is Mr. X and this is his voice. That has been helpful at times because sometimes, yeah, again, 10 chapters later, they come back and you're like, wait, what did I do for this character? One that I'll say to all you authors out there, please do not have 10 to 15 characters in one scene all talking, because it is impossible to keep track of. It's also impossible, even as a reader, like, forget the audio side of it. Like, if you have so many characters in a room, the only situation in which that works is on film,
Yeah.
right? You can have 10 or 15 people in a room and you're seeing different faces, right? You're cutting to them. It doesn't work in a book. And yet sometimes, you'll just come across that scene and it's like, whatever the scene in the police precinct, and there's like 10 cops and they're all talking. You're like, how am I going to distinguish these 10 cops?
Well, that leads me into my next question, like pet peeves, and you don't have to be any
Okay,
like
that's it.
specifics,
No,
but I
that's
mean,
my biggest one.
well, I mean, for me as a listener, there are times where I can tell when an author probably does not listen to audiobooks because it's just like nonstop speech tags,
Yeah. Yeah.
especially if it's like between two
Oh,
characters. And it's
oh
like,
yeah, yeah. I know what you mean. Yeah, yeah. No, my biggest pet peeve is the multiple characters in a room all talking, and when they're all basically the same. Like, you don't need three random firefighters to show up on the scene and all have sort of speaking parts, let's call it, right? It's not necessary. And it drives me a little crazy. Um, the other one, this is a funny one. It's probably authors don't necessarily think about it in print, but as if characters have similar names.
hmm, Yes.
that makes me a little nuts, right? If you have a character named Jack in one chapter, and then you have a character named Jackie in another chapter, and then you have John and Joan and Mary and Mark or something. It's like, can we distinguish the character names a little more?
Yeah.
So that's a second little pet peeve of mine.
No,
Um,
no, and I noticed. I mean, it's the same thing in print. I remember reading a book one time where I think there were four characters, and they all had the same. I mean, it was different names,
Same
but it all
letter,
started
right?
with the same letter, and it was like, how
Yeah,
did no
yeah.
one catch this?
I know that. Yeah, yeah, exactly. So you have Robert and Richard and Rodney and whatever. Um, so yeah, that's it. Those would be my three, I guess.
So, pickups. How typically for every project there are pickups, I'm assuming. Can you kind
Yeah.
of explain for people who don't know, like what pickups
So
consist of?
pickups, yeah. So a pickup is basically a misread. And so we will record it, send it off to the editor. They will check it and they'll say, oh, you inverted these two words in this sentence. So we got to have a pickup, which means we have to re-record it. That's an interesting art all by itself because what you do is you're given the original clip so that you can hear your voice and how you read it, and then you have to record it with the correct sentence. And so you have to match the tone and feel and style and it's hard because the human voice changes from day to day. So if you come back 3 weeks later on a project and whatever you've had a cold or you're stuffed up or something, you can get that one sentence that sort of is a pickup that's dropped in, which sounds different from the sentences on either side of it. And that's what you don't want. Obviously, you want it to be seamless. So pickups can be tricky. I find that I really have to listen to them a few times, and then I have to listen to my re-record, and then kind of match the two together. And what I'll do is I'll put them on different tracks so that they're stacked, and then I'll play through them and sort of I'll toggle one off and one on. And so I want to make sure that they kind of sound the same as I'm going through, and I'll do the best I can with them. But yeah, it's its own art form is getting the pickup to sound like the original.
So you have narrated now over 500 audiobooks, and and what year you said? So it was 2007 was the first one. So we're coming up now. What this is 18 years.
Oh my God. Yeah. So 2007 was the first one, but then I didn't really do anything until 2010 or 11.
Oh
So there was
wow,
kind of a
wow,
gap. Yeah.
geez.
Yeah.
So
I,
yeah, so I feel like in going back to that idea of like a lot of these narrators out there, yourself included, obviously, who have become very well known in the space. Um, it almost feels like there are certain genres that you guys become very well known about.
yeah.
Certain narrators just sort of gravitate. I mean, at what point did you are there certain books that you just enjoy more than others, or do you find that maybe you just as a narrator you just really click with a certain genre over other genres?
That's a good question. I enjoy a lot of different kinds of books. I guess if I could sort of, my career has been, so one section is, let's call it, literature, right? And that includes a lot of classics. I've done a lot of classic
And I'm sorry,
titles.
real quick, War and Peace,
Yeah,
55
or
out
yeah,
55
yeah, exactly.
hours and 30
Yeah,
minutes.
exactly,
My
exactly.
goodness.
So, exactly like War and Peace. I've also done a lot of spiritual titles. So there was not only the Bible, but books by Thich Nhat Hanh and other religious leaders, which I find very rewarding. And then I've done a lot of thrillers. And so those seem to be my three kind of categories. I don't do a lot of like YA, young adult. I don't do a lot of romance. I don't do erotica. I've done some science fiction, but not as much. Those first three categories that I mentioned seem to be the bulk of my work, and it's not like I prefer one to the other, right? I enjoy the variety. Actually, it's great to read, like a book about the Buddha or something. I'll read that, and then I'll come to a thriller, where it's like get some action, get some like car chases and get some that kind of stuff going as well, and then I'll read a memoir about somebody's time in Italy or something as a young man, and it's a very thoughtful kind of poetic kind of book. And so I like all three, and I like the variety. I think it'd be hard to just do one thing.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. So I mentioned War and Peace. That was
Hmm.
55 hours or 30 minutes. Was that the longest thing you've ever done, or I mean,
Well, it's
what's
the
the longest
longest.
project what
It's the
you mentioned
longest.
before, right? My Struggle?
Yeah, yeah. My struggle, which is 3,600 pages, but that took place over a 5 year stretch because we were waiting for the translations to come in.
Mm,
So War and Peace at 55 hours is probably the single longest title. The My Struggle books, there's six of them. So I don't know how they break down, but I don't think they're 55 hours each. And they
yeah.
were spread out. So War and Peace, yeah, that took about a month to do.
And when
But
you're
this was
narrating, you're
great.
just doing one project at a time. It's not like you're like in the morning you're doing this, then
Well,
in the evening you do something different.
typically that's correct. There are occasions where what you say does happen, where in the morning you're doing one thing and in the evening you're doing another. I only do that if one of those projects is particularly short, like if it's a novella or something, maybe I can sort of throw that in. I wouldn't want to do two, full novels, which are going to be 12 hours or whatever they are, at the same time. I think that'd be very hard. I think you'd get confused. I think the characters would start to sort of jump from one book to the other. Like your brain would like, which book are we reading?
Yeah. And if anybody ever watches Hot Ones, the host Sean Evans has said that he will not eat chicken wings, like,
Mm-hmm.
outside of the show just because he's sick of it. So for someone whose job literally it is just to read,
Yeah,
are you able to like have pleasure reading where you're just, you know what I mean? Like where you can just kind of, and
I,
then when you are you able to kind of turn your brain off to not kind of like, not like you're reading it to be a project?
yeah. For the second part of the question is more interesting to me. No, I cannot read at this point without thinking about how I would record it. It is a professional hazard. It is nearly impossible to just read a book for pleasure, just pure pleasure, like lie on the couch on a Sunday and read a book. I think those days are over. The same way, like whatever, a film editor probably can't watch a film without thinking, oh, I would have cut that scene differently. Um, I don't read a lot for pleasure at this point because, as we've been discussing, like I'll read for hours a day, and so it's kind of like the last thing I want to do in the evening is just crack open a book. Um, so I have slowed down on my recording schedule, and so I've opened up a little bit more space in my brain to be able to read. But I haven't really been able to just say like, oh, there's this. I've been hearing about this book. I want to go read it. I just don't have room for that in my head.
Yeah. So, so again, you are, considered one of the top, I would say one of the top male narrators out there. Of course, early in your career, it was probably, beggars can't be choosers. You were basically, any project that came your way, you were like, okay, sure, money's
Yeah.
money. But at a certain point, when you become more in demand, are you able to become more selective in terms of the projects you're taking on? And if so, like what, like when you look at certain projects, I mean, again, of course, like you had narrated, of course, my two Killing Room books, which amazing
Yeah.
job. Thank you so much. It's an honor.
Thank you.
Like at
Yeah.
what point, Blackstone had reached out to you,
Hmm.
you know, like you don't know who I am. You know what I mean? I
Right.
mean, like how did you decide
So
like, okay, this is a project I will, I
yeah.
would do.
So let's use your books as an example, which I very much enjoyed. I encourage everyone to go out and either read it in print or listen to the audio. This is an interesting case. Like, no, I was not familiar with you or your work, but Blackstone and I have a long-standing relationship, and so when they came to me with something, I worked with the assumption that it was good. Right? I was like, they're not going to bring this to me unless it's something good. At this point in my life and career, I can say with some confidence that publishers bring me good books. They're not going to waste my time with something that they don't think makes sense for me, or that they don't think is going to do well, or whatever, right? And so I remember reading The Killing Room, and so what I do when I get a new book is I read the first 5 pages, right? That's what we all do, just to see what it's like. And I remember being sucked in instantly. It took like half a page, and I was just like, all right, what's going on here? Something really interesting is going to unfold in this book. So my compliments to you because it drew me in immediately. And I was like, yes, let's do this. Um, so yeah, I get offered typically, good books, better books, books that might end up, winning some awards or being nominated for awards, that kind of stuff. Authors often ask for me at this point. They'll call their publisher through their agent or whatever and say, "I want this guy to read my book." And so I occupy a very, very nice, comfortable space in this world where I get offered good books and authors are reaching out to me and publishers know that they're going to bring me good things. So that's kind of how it works. And I will be booked for a few months in advance, typically. But then these things shuffle around a lot. It's a funny thing, like you'll have something booked and then they're like, oh, we're waiting for some more corrections from the author. We're waiting on the third pass or the fourth pass. So we can't record for another 2 weeks. And so suddenly you have like a hole in your schedule. And so things can kind of be dropped in like that. So for authors out there who, think like, oh, I could never get so and so to read my book, you'd be surprised. Like they may actually be available. So it's not like it's different from being in a film where you're in New Zealand for 6 months filming and like you really you can't get back. We are just working at home, and often there are these spots open up. So people out there who have their favorite narrators, they should ask them. You'd be surprised what can happen.
And I'm assuming, of course, like your rate has gone up over the years
Uh,
from what it probably
yeah,
was
I mean,
10, 15
right.
years ago.
I think the whole industry's rate has gone up, uh, so which is a good thing. And if you look at what's happened with the sales numbers, I think audiobooks is the biggest growth market in all of publishing. Right? I
Yeah.
think by far, it goes up by double digits like every year. At one point, I think it was considered the fastest growing segment of all of, they called it entertainment, of all of entertainment. It was like the growth was outpacing like film box office or, Netflix subscribers or something. It was just like audiobooks like just took off. And so, yeah, it's been beneficial to actors and to the industry, and it's created a lot of careers.
How far out are you right now in terms of like how far are you booked out with projects for 2025?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting question, like, because I actually have some projects I know I'm going to be doing that aren't happening until like June, but that doesn't mean I'm booked solid from, end of January to June. I know that there are these books coming from authors who have asked me to do their books. So there are a few of those that are out there, and then there are a few titles that I have that I'm working on right now. Typically it's like a couple of months ahead are kind of booked. And then there's a little kind of softer scheduling that happens, and things are going to get moved around a little bit, but that kind of firms up as you go through it. But yeah, I would say typically, like I know kind of what I'm doing for the next 2 months.
It's a little after 7. I don't want to keep
Oh,
much more of your time, but
okay.
I had told you in the green room earlier. Well, actually, I guess this was last year. Lisa Scottolini.
Mm.
I'm saying that correctly, right?
Yeah,
Scottolini.
Scottolini. Yeah.
She was up here in Harrisburg at my local independent Midtown Scholar, shout out Midtown Scholar, and she was on tour for her most recent book. And at the end, of course, oftentimes there's a Q&A with the audience, and a woman
Hmm.
stands up and she says, "I just want to let you know that I no longer read your books." And Lisa's like, "Okay." And she's like, "Not ever since, now I only listen to your books
Oh,
because of you have so and so." And then
right.
Lisa just went on and on about you. She's like,
Oh,
"He is amazing, isn't he?" So
oh,
yeah,
that's so
there's
kind.
definitely, you definitely have fans out there,
I
probably more so
appreciate
than
that.
you already suspect.
I appreciate that. We narrators, as we talked about briefly, we're kind of hidden in this process sometimes, even though, yes, we've become known, we're still kind of hidden. And I'm always surprised when, somebody will write me and say, "Oh, I've been listening to books you've read for the last 10 years." I'm like, wow, and you're just telling me now? It's like, don't be shy, you know.
And so to wrap up here, the Audie Awards are essentially like the audiobook
Yeah,
Oscars in a way, and you've
sure.
won several. They just
Yeah.
announced a lot of nominations. So you've been nominated now for how many titles this year?
So there are four. So the Audis work in different categories, and so Three of those titles are what we call multicast titles, meaning there are multiple narrators involved in them. And so I can't take, sorry, excuse me, actually, all four of the books are multicast titles that I've been nominated for. The big one is Playground by Richard Powers, where I actually do the majority of the narration. And that is up for Audiobook of the Year, which was kind of a surprise. So fingers crossed. We'll see if
Yeah,
we
yeah,
actually win.
absolutely.
Yeah,
Fingers crossed.
yeah.
Actually, real quick, that was another thing I
Mm.
forgot to ask. So yes, so you do so a lot of solo narration,
Hmm.
like the Killing Room. It's just you.
Yeah,
You're the narrator. There are,
right.
especially Audible does a lot of these like dramatic,
Hmm.
almost like old radio plays. When
Yeah.
you were doing something like that,
Hmm.
are you in studio with the other narrators, or is this
So
like
the
you're on
multi,
Zoom with the other narrators? I mean,
yeah,
how does
yeah.
that
So the
work?
multicast that I'm talking about, we each handle different chapters.
Right,
So we do not record together at all.
right.
Like I do my chapters, I send them in. They do their chapters, they send them in. The radio plays that you're talking about, and I've done a few of those. Those are great because you're all in a room together and you're like in a semicircle and you're all on your own mics, and it is like an old timey radio play, minus the guy in the corner doing the sound effects. But yeah, you're reading the script straight through. Those are a lot of fun, I have to say. Audible does great job with those. And so, but the multicast I'm referring to, we were all separate.
Yeah. Yeah, no, and there's definitely a lot of books out there like that where I mean you've done some did you do some James Patterson where sometimes they
Yes,
have like
yes,
one narrator does the
right,
one character or whatever and then
right,
you do
exactly. Yeah. So
yeah,
they'll have like one character do the cop and one character do the killer, if it's
yeah.
from two different vantage points, that kind of thing. Then I've also done some where, like some David Baldacci books, where I do the majority of it, but then in some scenes with this female character, actually Brittany Presley was in them,
Impressive.
and so she and I would do the dialogue together, and then I would handle all the rest of the book. So
Yeah,
there are
I'll be
different
honest
ways
with
that
you.
these things get put together.
I'm not a fan of that. I
Of
mean,
what, when
from like a
it's
listener, it just it's
yeah,
well, I will just say this. I had heard one a long time ago, and I don't know, maybe
yeah,
just it wasn't done right, but
yeah.
it didn't seem as natural, if that makes
It can be
sense.
clunky.
Yeah.
One of the nice things about audiobooks is that there is this kind of old world feel of like somebody just telling you a story. And the way our parents read to us when we were kids, and it was, they didn't have mom do one part and dad do another part. It was just one parent reading the book, and there's something very kind of magical and wonderful about just one storyteller. So I agree with you. I will say that when it is different povs and different chapters, I find that that works
Mhm.
kind of well,
Absolutely.
especially if it's like, here's a male part and then there's a female part, and so it cuts to somebody else. But I'm also not a fan of the sort of random intercutting of dialogue. I'd
Right.
rather just have one person tell me the story.
Yeah, I mean, it could be jarring, and obviously you don't want to take the listener out of the story.
Right,
So, it
right,
goes back to what you
right.
said before, where you're just,
Yeah,
as a narrator, you don't want to kind of overcome the story. You're
yeah.
you're
You
you're
don't want
just
to get in
there.
the way. Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
So, all right, well, Eduardo, I appreciate your
Thank
time,
you.
everyone. I'm sure at this point you've heard probably an audiobook narrated by Eduardo, but if not, definitely go out there. He has narrated over 500 of them. I would start with War and Peace. That's going to give you that's
I,
going to keep you busy for quite a while.
I would start with your books.
Or okay, there you go. All right, love it.
Yeah.
All right, so again, Eduardo, thank you so much for hanging out,
Thank
and
you.
we'll see everybody next time. Bye.